Hi kids. So I wanted to have a talk about elbows and how they relate to everything else. In our last video, I showed this movement of bringing the elbows forward. I wasn't talking, I was just showing. Bringing the elbows forward while the hands were interlaced and on the belly. So if you go ahead and do that now, place your hands in a comfortable place on your belly and just bring your elbows forward. And notice how you do that. Notice how you do that. Just comfortably, slowly, and notice if the heels of your hands come away from your body. Now don't change anything, just notice. And then, well, let's interlace the fingers non-habitually. Place them somewhere on the abdomen so that the shoulders can be down. If you place them up here, shoulders have a tendency to go up. So just comfortably bring your elbows forward, and now intentionally leave the heels of your hands on your body and feel what's different about that. So if you leave the hands on the body, the heels of the hands as you bring the elbows forward, and whichever elbow moves less, make the other elbow move less, rather than if one is easy and comes forward more, don't try to make the other side match it. Okay, do the opposite so that the brain is in a different kind of a competition with itself. So you're bringing the elbows forward, and the heels of the hands stay on your belly. Now, if you were to do that with just one hand, feel what's going on in this area and in the neck. And feel what's different if you pivot over the fingers and let the heel of the hand come away from the body. So here, leaving the heel of the hand on the body. So it makes it restricts the movement. It makes it a smaller movement. And notice if there is a sense of the elbow lengthening at any point as you're bringing it forward. So listen for a lengthening in the direction that the elbow is pointed. And then try pivoting over the pads of the fingers and keeping the wrist more or less straight, and feel what's different about that in terms of the shoulder girdle, the shoulder blade. You can try one, try the other. So how are they different? How are they different for you? Now, I would like to posit that this organization, with the heel of the hand on, this particular organization of the upper back, the thoracic spine, the neck, collarbones, you name it, is what we want in the Tai Chi. Not this. Why? Well, you can test it on yourself pretty easily. If you pivot on the on the pads of your fingers, keep your wrist straight, let your elbow come forward, let the shoulder come forward, let the shoulder blade slide around the ribs. Feels good, yeah? Oh, opens up so nicely. Yes, and that's good. That's not bad. That's never, that's not wrong. However, if you go to this place and give yourself a little tug, it's pretty easy to uproot yourself, right? Pivot, give yourself a little tug in the direction that the elbow's already going, and it would be a struggle to counter that. And you see here, well, yes, I've countered it by rounding my back backwards. I've stayed over my axis, but now I'm vulnerable to this, right? Now, if you go back, you're vulnerable to this. You can even push yourself over. You can have so much fun with yourself. So, if you keep the heel of the hand on the body, something interesting happens that's different in the ribs something interesting happens in the wrist, in Tai Chi. Now this is so interesting because I'm finding Feldenkrais lessons that I am doing right now are converging with things that Master Zhang always said to us in the language of the Tai Chi form, which is you seat the wrist down. This specific bone, it's called seating the wrist. You seat the wrist. I think I used to say when I taught in San Francisco, it's like when you put your phone in the cradle, boom, in the charging station, boom. But not so many people do that anymore, right? Everything is plugged in. But boom, that. Now, there's something about that. If you keep the palm of your hand, the heel of your hand on your body as you're bringing the elbow forward, something happens in the angle of the wrist relative to the forearm. So that doesn't happen if you pivot and keep the hand straight like it's in a splint at the wrist. So you can feel that. You can do it with both sides. So if you were a butterfly, and this is where the pads of the middle fingers is where the wings attach to the body of the butterfly, right? You can conceptualize that. But now what if you widen, interlace the fingers, and have where the wings attach to the body of the butterfly are the heels of the hands. So it's a wider base. Now listen to what happens as the elbow goes forward and lengthens, something in the wrist. Now, from there, you go to pull or push yourself. You're locked into yourself, and I don't mean that in a rigid way, but you're integrated. Everything is integrated and in a harmonious way, whereas this is not. So when, for example, you're making the shoulder or the elbow circle, which is so easy to do this, right? Here. What if you, after playing with this feeling here a bit, getting to know what the chest does, how much does it sink, how much does your lower back come backwards and lengthen? Do you sink as you do it? But I'll tell you what I feel. I feel that I sink, but that at the same time my neck is lengthening. And that's probably because I'm thinking about suspending my head like I'm a Christmas ornament. Now, there are two lessons that I've done on the Feldenkrais Dojo. One is called Watching Paint Dry. And it is about lengthening the elbows and lengthening the head. And it's a very interesting lesson. I will link to it here. But there's another lesson that I will maybe link to in the next video. The watching paint dry is very, very subtle. And I'll just leave it at that. There's another lesson called butterfly wings, or butterfly arms. And it is this concept of leaving the hands on the belly. There's also the hands behind the back, lying on them, bringing the elbows forward, which is a different kind of constraint. But there's something about the organization of the elbow relative to the chest, relative to the rest of the frame, that is really, well, I'll just let you experiment with that. Let you find out for yourself, what do you find when you keep the relationships sort of reined in so that it's not that, which feels so good. And I would never say don't do that. Certainly going to the limit of the movement is great for the fascia, and it's great for finding out where is the boundary of the movement for you. But as we get into push hands practice, God knows when we'll be able to do that. But as soon as we get back together, we're going to start doing some push hands. Distance push hands. I'll figure something out to do online. I'll figure out an imaginary opponent for you. Don't you worry. But feel when, I think it was the day that I got attacked by the killer bees. What I was playing with, what I was getting after was a smaller circle that brings the rest of you with it harmoniously, and not that it becomes so exaggerated and dramatic that you use way more force than you need to you would use way more energy than you would need to stay upright, especially if you were in a challenging situation with your balance. Let's say balancing on the edge of a cliff. You might not want to do that, but you could do this, right? Who was the guy that used to walk between buildings? Was it Evel Knievel? No, he jumped over the Grand Canyon with a motorcycle or something insane. Anyway, so this concept of the elbows. That's all I'm going to say about it. Play with it and find out what's the relationship. This bone, the elbow, the neck and the shoulder, and sinking. Yeah? So, which brings us to something similar we did. We pressed the pubic bone back, right? And we go down. Now, could you elicit, or does a similar feeling, response happen as you bring the elbows forward? What happens in your quad? What happens in the quad if you're in a forward back stance and you go to the back? Or you go to the front? What happens? Ooh, when you go to the front leg and do this, it's very interesting. It's a constraint. This is a constraint, but within the constraint we find freedom. As my Russian ballet teacher used to say, freedom in cage. So, something to think about, something to play with. And when you're doing the form, what we were told over and over and over by Master Zhang was sink the elbow, sink the elbow, sink the elbow. Elbow down, shoulder down, elbow down, shoulder. It was like a broken record. And I have to say, playing with this feeling of this lengthening elbow and lengthening neck, as you lift the arms, if you can tap into that feeling in the elbow, in the shoulder, in the chest, I think there's a lot there if you just think of lengthening the elbows. You can play with any dimension of lengthening the elbows, which is different than, I find it's different than sinking the elbows. Lengthening the elbows. For me, sinking is somehow passive, like a stone falling through the water is sinking. But lengthening the elbows causes this. Yeah? Okay, so something to think about. Let's do the next move, which is before the last move we learned. Okay? Okay.